Welcome. This is GPTV1 Live, back with another live update on the P. Diddy trial. This is the morning and afternoon soap opera as of today. So we're going to listen in, and as far as we know, Kid Cudi testified today, and we're going to get some response from these lawyers who they have analyzing the case. So let's check out what they're saying.
And once he got on the stand, he testified about getting his boss drugs at times. He testified about setting up and cleaning up Diddy's hotel rooms. He stocked them with clothing and candles and liquor and baby oil. He bought some of these room supplies, he says, with his corporate credit card and cleaned up the rooms after Diddy left before the maid service came in. Now, why do that? Why do it before the maid service comes in? Well, because Kaplan put it this way. Protecting him and protecting his public image was very important, and that was something I was very keen on doing. Now, Cassie testified that Kaplan quit after seeing Diddy abuse her. Now, we haven't heard that from him yet, but he is back on the stand in the morning. And you know who else prosecutors plan to call? Rapper Kid Cudi. Recall that Cassie testified that she was once in a relationship with him.
Okay,
and
he
that
already
sent Diddy
testified, so we
spiraling
want to move on
into
from
a
this one.
jealous rage. Back with us tonight,
We're gonna
CNN's
move
Elizabeth
from this
Wagmeister,
one.
who witnessed all the testimony in court with me today, even following a
There's silence on that. So far, Kid Cudi has testified. So this report, she said, is probably from earlier today. So go into something else. Stop sharing that. This is GPTV1 live P. Diddy trial, live updates. And go here. Oh, that's the wrong one. Let me just remove that. I'm looking for the photo I need to be having up here. A thumbnail. See, is that it?
prosecution's theory that she was essentially a victim, that he controlled her every move with respect to, her personal life and her professional life. And that's what the defense is trying to go at there.
By the way, one of the things that we do during this lunchtime show is we not only take your questions, we not only take what's happening in real time and break it down, but we also put up polls. We put up a poll right now. Do you believe Diddy blew up Kid Cudi's car? Matt, 91% say yes, 9% say no. What do you make of that stat?
Well, I think it probably reflects exactly what the jury is thinking, too. I think that's very persuasive evidence. And remember, Jesse, this is one of the predicate acts for the RICO violation. So arson is one of the allegations. And remember, they only have to establish 2 of those over the course of a 10-year period of time. So it's a very broad net. 2 of those predicate acts, and if they can establish the enterprise element, that's all they need for the RICO.
Can I get really, really legally specific here?
Sure.
Is it they have to prove he committed them? Or for purposes of racketeering conspiracy, there was a conspiracy to attempt to commit those crimes?
It can be anybody essentially involved in the conspiracy doing that. It does not have to be Sean Combs himself, which is an important distinction to make.
Do you think they have the criminal agreement act of racketeering proven?
That's one of the most interesting parts about this for me. RICO violations, remember, this was designed essentially for mafia type things, where you have a criminal organization or enterprise for profit. And the enterprise here, of course, would be bad boy records. And the defense ultimately is going to argue here, none of this advances the actual enterprise bad boy record. So they're going to argue that it fails to establish RICO because...
I want the common purpose, though, would be to make him happy, fulfill whatever desires he wants.
Right. Well, that's exactly what the defense is ultimately, I think, going to argue. And this it may be such a fine point that this is something that's hashed out in the courts of appeal. But advancing the interests of an individual is not advancing the interests of the actual criminal enterprise or the enterprise itself. It's a very fine legal note, but I think the defense is keying in exactly on that point.
You're good attorney. Did anybody tell you that? You're a good attorney, making a good argument here. Okay, got an update from court. The judge says, what's the relevance of these exhibits? Again, talking about photographs of Cassandra Ventura, it appears. Well, so the judge sex trafficking, but it does become a question if this is relevant. What are you taking away from that?
Look, I think it's a minor point. I mean, they're arguing over the introduction of this photo, whether it comes in or doesn't come in. Is it, at the end of the day, is it really going to make a big difference? So I get it. But again, I think I don't see the relevance to it unless I hear more argument.
Got a question for you, Safa. This is from MM7. Is it likely the prosecution is starting with older victims and older evidence, Cassie, Kid Cudi, but as the trial continues, they will get into more recent crimes and victims tied into the RICO case? Good question.
It's very possible. I think one of the main reasons why Miss Ventura went first initially was because she was victim number 1. Not only that, she's very heavily pregnant. She could go into labor at some point in time in the very near future, and they wanted to ensure that she would still be able to testify in the event that she ultimately went into labor and would be out on some sort of maternity leave for the remainder of the trial. So I think that's initially why they put her on. I think we've still got to hear from victim 2 and victim 3. I expect that they are going to be alleged newer victims and that they will provide more up-to-date or more recent testimony about more recent acts and activities alleged against Mr. Combs. They can absolutely be prosecuted. So it's going to be interesting to see what route the government takes with respect to this victim. That is a material witness. That person has been subpoenaed. I think I've heard not only have they not been able to get a hold of victim 3, but they also haven't been able to get a hold of the attorney. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I've heard. So very interesting to see how the government's going to handle this. Now, this person to not be cooperative at this point. Does the government really want to put a witness on who had been missing in action and uncooperative, or that they're going to really have to strategically decide?
I got a question for you, Matt. This is from NLin93. If there were DNA from the car, so I think talking about Kid Cudi's Porsche that was allegedly set on fire by Sean. If there were DNA from the car, wouldn't the feds know? Because he was asked about, do you know if DNA was extracted from the car, and he didn't know. This was the question that he was posed by Brian Steele. The DNA taken, are you aware it came back female? And there was an objection. Okay. And then Steele says, do you know there were DNA results? And Scott Muscati said no. So I guess go back to the question, if there were DNA from the car, wouldn't the feds know?
I you certainly think so. But, you know, as a general proposition for everyone to understand, heat is one of the things that destroys DNA. Okay, heat, time, water. DNA is biological material, of course, and you wouldn't expect to find too much at an arson scene when it comes to DNA.
Follow-up question, can one appeal if they take a deal?
Generally, no. Once you take a deal, it essentially is, the appellate process is essentially ended at that. You've admitted what you've done. But I don't see any prospect here of any sort of settlement in this. This is going to go to a jury.
There was talk about whether or not he rejected a deal before trial, but now we're in the crux of the trial. We're after Cassandra Ventura's testimony. So the prosecution could be like, you forced us to put her on the stand and recount these traumatic memories, alleged traumatic memories. They might not offer a deal, or if it is a deal, it's not going to be as attractive as it was before, right?
Once the trial starts, once you get a jury panel, you start.
Parties by not requesting the videos, choosing to play for a lighter sentence instead?
Well, I think if I understand the question, is Sean Combs' defense trying to, hide evidence in this trial? Is that the question?
Yeah, it's tough to know. Shielding officials present at the freak-off party, so I'm guessing they're assuming there are other people who are being not mentioned at these, freak-offs, and was deliberately not, moving forward with more evidence to show who was there, but how that ties into maybe a lighter sentence, I'm not sure I 100% follow, but yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think that's the prosecution's job, right? The prosecution is the one, they're going to go out there and they're going to find the witnesses who are there and who are willing to testify about this. So Sean Combs doesn't have any obligation to produce witnesses that hurt his defense. That's the prosecution's job. I think the prosecution so far has done a fine job of finding some of these key witnesses and former employees who are testifying and really laying
out what image or images will be shown to the jury. The judge says, this one is of a public event, so what's the problem? Prosecutor Comey says, it's a low-cut dress. Judge says, I'm allowing it in, but not 652 nor 745. Bring in the witness and the jury, and the witness is a Mila Morales, who's a celebrity makeup artist. What's 652 or 745?
As far as the evidence code?
Yeah, if you know off the top of your head.
Essentially what the judge is doing is the judge is weighing prejudicial effect versus probative value on all these items of evidence. And a judge has to do that for virtually any item of evidence. So he is allowing in photos from the public event, but this judge has done a very good job, in my opinion, of kind of cutting away the fat, so to speak, on some of the more shocking or other things. For example, the jury saw stills of some of the freak-offs, but not the full video. It's interesting to see what the defense does with that overall, but that's just job. You're watching a judge essentially be a judge.
So before you guys got on, I was doing, I was giving my own analysis of the case. And one of the questions came that I was asked was, if he's acquitted, do you think they're going to bring more charges against him? I said, probably highly unlikely. Whatever evidence they had against him, they were going to go forward with right now. Which does beg the question, because I brought it up before. I'll go to you, Safa. This is Anthony O'Farrell. Why aren't there any minor victims in the criminal case? Because you and I know that he has been alleged to have abused minors in civil lawsuits. Criminal arena, very different than civil. But again, why, Safa, aren't there any minor victims in the criminal case?
You know, I don't think there's any evidence to support that there are any minor victims. There certainly was evidence to support that. The government would have charged him with that. You know, the burden of proof in the standard in our criminal world or during criminal practice is much different than civil. Civil is a much lower burden. With respect to criminal charges, there has to be an establishment of probable cause to make the arrest, and then the case will litigate on. And at the jury or at the jury stage, once the jury gets the case, they have to were children victims or child victims, and because of that, the government wouldn't charge that.
Got an update from court. Do you? This is okay. So this is this makeup artist being questioned. The prosecutor says, "Do you recognize anyone you've worked for?" And Ms. Morales says, "Sean Combs in the gray sweater and white collar." When did you work for?
Had not reviewed, had not talked to these people. And what's the intimation? That by failing to do so, she was overgeneralizing and therefore not having credibility? Because that's what the defense wants to go with.
Yes, so this is a big deal. And to Jen's point, if I'm what was the coercion? If this is about sex trafficking and not a freaky relationship, it's about the fact that I coerced you to do this.
But
not
you can talk
free
about
will.
coercion.
Yes, I get it. But inferences are drawn. If you're controlling everything, if you're behaving as a victim in this way, if you feel in love with someone and you have this mold of a person, what is the inference that's going to be made, right? A duck by any name is a duck. And so the reality is what does the defense have to rely on? The defense has to rely on the fact that you did not interview this specific witness. Not every witness is the same. We don't live in a cookie cutter society. You never met, right, a defendant who you testified for. You never met, right, a defendant who you testified for. You're always testifying for the victims. You're a hired gun in this particular situation. You've met with the prosecutors multiple times, and you've coordinated your testimony such that those dots can be connected. That's the defense argument. But the fact that she testified, very powerful for the prosecution. And if the jury draws those inferences of coercion, there is problems in Diddy land.
The prosecution and the defense, they sparred over the testimony of a forensic psychologist. Executive assistant to testify. But here's the big question tonight. Will the jury, the actual jury, connect the dots between the explanation of a trauma bond and the world that Cassie Ventura said that she lived in? The prosecution called psychologist Dawn Hughes to explain why Cassie may have stayed in an abusive relationship with Diddy for years. The judge had already ruled that she could not talk about coercive control, but she could discuss more broadly why victims may choose to stay in violent relationships or feel like they could not leave them. Hughes testified, quote, "When you're getting unpredictable abuse and unpredictable love, that creates this intermittent cycle. It's like a slot machine." She went on to say, you keep going back because you want that good feeling. They want that good partner that they got, fell in love with, and that becomes an immense trauma bond. Now, the defense repeatedly pointed out how Hughes had not reviewed any evidence in this case. More on that in a moment. But on redirect, the prosecutor finished what you might call a kind of a legal mic drop. She asked Hughes if she'd been retained broadly by defense attorneys. She said, yes, of course. The prosecutor then asked, in fact, have you previously I have. Now, she wasn't saying that it was actually this matter with Sean Diddy Combs, but the defense attorney she's talking about was Brian Steele. And his legal team later said that Steele, in a different case, chose not to use Hughes as a witness in that case that he was on at the time. And the client that he was dealing with was a victim of domestic violence herself.
Of course, the defense would say it's just domestic violence. There's not, they're not attaching the physical violence to the freak-offs per se. But I will say this much. I think the two most concrete examples, why am I talking to myself? For two most concrete examples, I think, of sex trafficking, the 2016 tape, right? So he allegedly kicks her, beats her, drags her right after a freak-off or an alleged freak-off, and the allegation that on a plane, he shows her tapes of the freak-offs as a way to intimidate her, embarrass her, and what does he allegedly demand right after they land? A freak-off. She has a freak-off. That feels to me two concrete examples of sex trafficking.
Well, that's what the prosecution's theory is, certainly. But remember, there's essentially three incarnations of that. One is it's one of the predicate acts of the RICO allegations, okay? The other is the sex trafficking itself, but as the defense has pointed out, they must establish essentially fraud, coercion, or some form of threat of fear of force. So force, fraud, or coercion. The theory is coercion. She's being coerced to do that for financial reasons and everything else. The third incarnation, if you will, of that is the transportation of prostitutes over state lines. Sure. Those are Mann Act violations. Those carry up to a 10-year penalty each. I think the prosecution's already satisfied that. I do too. What the defense is going to argue is that this is exactly what you said. This is a domestic violence case. And it's the world's most persuasive domestic violence case with the video and everything else. But that is a problem in their relationship, and it doesn't go to advancing this criminal enterprise that they've alleged.
That's why they're focusing so much. He's jealous, he's anger, she was jealous, problems in the relationship. I got an update from court. Prosecutor asked the makeup artist, where were you with her? She responds, Beverly Hills. I fell asleep in the room and woke up to a commotion. Cassie walked in, then Sean asking, where the bleep is she? What did he do? Into the bedroom, shut the door. I'm sure this is going to continue in a second. We'll let you know what the testimony is. Safa, got a question from Ashley Glass, who's been so patient. She's been asking this question for a while. I'm sorry I didn't see this earlier. Are Christina Coram and D-Rock going to get subpoenaed to testify, as their names are mentioned a lot in this case? And D-Rock, I believe, is one of Sean Combs' former security guards.
Relationship with Mr. Combs, working for Mr. Combs and facilitating certain things at Mr. Combs' direction. My guess is that the prosecution will say to him, or essentially testify on behalf of the government. If not, they can go after him, and he essentially could be a key piece of establishing this enterprise. So I do expect that the likelihood of him testifying or these individuals testifying is highly likely.
We got another update from court. So continuation of the makeup artist testimony. As I said, she was just talking about how Cassie walked in, then Sean asking, where the F is she? And then he walks into the bedroom, shuts the door. So now she's asked, what did you hear behind the door? She responds, yelling and screaming, both of them. Then Sean Combs left. What did you see next? Cassie, she had a swollen eye and knots on her head. I packed her things up. We went to my house. Okay. I got a question here for you, David. So this is from Fragility G4. Other than trying to discredit Cassie and saying everything was consensual, what else could the defense argue?
With respect to Cassie, I mean, they can argue that, look, the whole argument is this was consensual. This is a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, and this has absolutely nothing to do with racketeering. That is, they're absolute number one defense, and they're going all in on that. But they also are obviously going to try to show that Cassie was not this victim, that she was in on this as well, and that everything that happened, she was manipulative and she was a willing participant. And they want to use that to say that there's no crime committed here. There's no RICO violations here. This isn't sex trafficking. So I think they've been following that theme throughout this case.
Got an update from court. Prosecutor asks then, meaning like what happened next. The makeup artist says, my doctor friend came and examined her to see if she had a concussion. What were you afraid of? Sean, I feared for my life. Objection, move to strike, overruled. How long did she stay? Days. That's important, right? So the idea, the way that I see it, is the more you have a pattern of people who are being afraid, it not only establishes that Sean Combs had this criminal empire, that fear and threats and blackmail were something that he used, but doesn't it also explain why Cassandra Ventura didn't come forward and didn't leave?
Well, we had the psychologist who came in the other day and testified, I think, very persuasively about the dynamic of relationships like this, and it's almost like it's an abuse accommodation syndrome where people get in these cyclical sort of relationships. But I think what also is important about how long she stayed, keeping somebody against their will or coercing somebody to stay satisfies the elements of kidnapping, which of course is one of the other predicate acts. Yeah, no, and always have to remember those predicate crimes. We keep talking about it. You wonder if the jury knows what's going on. This is such a complicated charge, racketeering, and I think this case is going to come down to closing arguments and how they properly explain it and the jury instructions. Very, very complicated. Okay, so Safo, got a question from DJ Bill. Do you call this a modern day mob crime trial?